Hi, and welcome to Unbiased News. I'm your host for this evening, John Schick, and I'll be leading you through one of the most interesting and oldest topics, that of government. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after these messages.
Like a layered cake, dual federalism is when all levels of government remain supreme in their jurisdiction. However, cooperative federalism is much more like a marble cake, in which they do in fact cooperate for the good of the people. Next time you're eating cake, think of your government.
Democracy. Let your voice be heard.
Welcome back. Up next we have government. The earliest form dates back to the caveman, who, in his primitive state, had no need of laws governing highways or regulating taxes. Instead, as he began collecting an assortment of rocks and other such items, he had an increasing need to protect his property. As the population grew, laws were developed. The earliest known form of law is Hammurabi's Code, written by King Hammurabi himself, which stated a list of severe punishments for different crimes. This he hoped would scare people into being good. Of course, today we have Santa Claus to do that. Since Hammurabi's time, the people have been crying out for their voice to be heard in the government. In ancient Greece and Rome, they had a form of republic, which allowed the people to vote for who they wanted in office. Julius Caesar, well known for his Caesar salad, was one of those elected leaders. He was eventually appointed dictator, and accidentally forgot to relinquish his power when the term was up. A group of concerned nobles who feared returning to a monarchy each took a jab at him. Unfortunately, he never recovered. Julius Caesar's rise to power illustrated the dangers that democracy could have. Now, in the past, the kings ruled by divine right. That is, the gods gave him the throne. Anyone who questioned the kings questioned the gods. With John Locke's idea, all that changed. He said governments are just contracts between the people and the state. This made them much easier to get out of, because instead of infuriating the gods, people were just tearing up a piece of paper. The Magna Carta was one of those contracts, in which King John signed in 1215, which limited the king's power. In England, the Parliament put the king in check. However, it wasn't a total checkmate because the king still has some authority, but the Parliament regulates taxes, among other things. They eventually began piling them on the American colonies, and eventually the colonists began to wonder why they were paying taxes but not being represented. And this led to revolution. And fortunately for us, we won. After our American Revolution, many more spread around the world, with each government throwing off their old forms and adopting a more democratic kind of government. Russia's revolution came a little late to the table, however. They've always been a bit isolated over there, and it wasn't until 1922 that the Soviet Union was formed. All this revolution leads us to our modern form of government, which we'll discuss next, right after this break.
Communism. We share everything. If I had $100, you would get some of it.
So tell me, how many shirts did you have before communism?
2.
And how many do you have now?
Just 1.
It's probably much better quality. What's it made out of?
I pieced it together from the 2 shirts I used to have.
And there's a brief look inside the Soviet Union.
Welcome back. Up next is the subject of our own government, the United States. On loan from National Archives, this 200-year-old document clearly states that we are that we are a democracy. Ever since our founding fathers scrapped the Articles of Confederation for our Constitution, we've been using it very successfully for the past 200 years. Now, our government works in an interesting way. Instead of putting all the power into one leader and one ruler, we divide it into 3 sections, or 3 branches, with each branch holding a unique form of the power. So it's divided. For instance, the legislature drafts laws. The executive branch, or the president, can either sign those laws into existence or veto them, and the judicial branch can interpret the law and tell us what the original authors meant when they wrote it. Now, each of these branches is divided, and this is called the checks and balances system, so that no one branch can, take over the other 2. Well, Voting is a very important key in democracy, and our founding fathers sought to limit that. Instead of having a direct democracy, they instituted the Electoral College. Now, this is not somewhere you go when you graduate from high school. The Electoral College is a group of representatives from each state who cast their vote for the president depending on what the majority of each state wants. So it was put in place to limit the democracy's effect and to bring in forms of a republic. But nevertheless, the individual's vote is still what determines the outcome of the elections. Now, a side note is electronic voting machines. They have created quite a controversy lately, and part of the reason is that, like PCs or personal computers, they can have viruses, potentially, or other hackers or other means of tampering with the data. So, a well-placed magnet could erase quite a bit of information. They also would make it hard to do a recount since there's no paper trail. All these fears do compete with the prevailing method, though, that the electronic voting machines are easier to tally the votes, and with this computer society, they may be the way of the future. But in the end, democracy is the government of choice for the people. It, like no other government, has been able to allow the people to have their voice in the government. And whatever form we're going to take in the future, one thing is certain: the people will continue to have a say in our government. You're watching Unbiased News. I'm John Schick. The old document clearly states that we are that we are a democracy.